It's cold. These words that have been blaring in your mind for the past 2, perhaps 3 months, you can't be sure of the exact time, as it's lost all meaning. But the one truth, the unshakable truth, is the bitter cold of the Sierra Nevadas, or California mountains as you know them to be. How you came to be there amongst the icy summits and naked pines and conifers was the result of a long, arduous journey, the likes of which many before and many after you would take. I'm starving. Your body had long since silenced the hunger pangs in an effort to sharpen your focus and ensure your survival. But the meal you partook in the nights prior, one so heinous, unspeakable, necessary, has brought them roaring back to the surface, pushing that basic human need to the forefront of your mind. Stronger than the cold, stronger than the pain in your nearly bare feet. I'm exhausted. For over 30 days you have walked, burning calories your body did not have, eating away the small amount of muscle you had left. Walking, walking, walking. Your shoes have rotted off of your feet. The clothes on your body, hand-stitched by you, your mother, your siblings, nearly gone as well. The need for survival, for safety, warmth, food. How could the state of your clothes matter? You have a family to save, your mother, your siblings, a husband and father to avenge. You are Sarah Graves Fosdick, and the Sierra Nevadas have not claimed your soul yet. Hello, my name is Nicole. I go by Nyx Gemini here on YouTube and elsewhere online. And this is a discussion about The Indifferent Stars Above by Daniel James Brown and the Donner Party as a whole. This is actually my first YouTube video, so welcome to my maiden voyage, I guess. This is probably going to be really rough to watch, to be honest with you. I'm not entirely comfortable in front of the camera yet. And if I'm looking over here, it's because I can see myself and I'm like try not to look at myself over there. So some background about me, I have a bachelor's in history from Arizona State University. I got my degree online while I was working for a certain green coffee company that will not be named. I've always had a love and affinity for history, particularly American history. And when I say American, I mean the whole North American continent. But like, honestly, it's mainly just US just because I live in the States. So it just is what it is. Anyway, the love of history I got from my mom. My mom is also a history buff, kind of runs in the family, I guess. I'm a pretty strong believer that everybody loves history, even if they don't think so. I think history ultimately is just the story of humanity and people, and even something as like idle or something as pointless, you could say, as gossip is history. It's somebody's story. So I think it's important, and I think everybody likes it. They just haven't found the right story yet. Timers before I get started. While I am a lover of history, I am by no means an expert on anything covered in this. I'm just somebody who loves to read and loves any excuse to write something. I wrote way too much about this. I am a certified yapaholic, if you couldn't tell already. I love to talk all the time. My friends and family are sick of hearing me talk about the Donner Party, so I'm going to subject all of you to that now. I hand wrote 60 pages of notes on my tablet, and maybe I'll include like a little clip in the corner or something. Where am I? I'll include a clip right here or something, maybe of like me scrolling through all my fucking pages of notes because it's actually insane. And then I converted all of those notes that I hand wrote into a script. Then I'm going to read, hopefully, and I hope that it comes across well because yeah, this took me a long time and I need people to hear it so I can move on. Also, if you aren't aware of the Donner Party story already, I'm going to give you a lot of trigger warnings so that way you can see yourself out, okay? If you're not aware, this story deals with an extreme survival situation. Lots of death, starvation, murder, cannibalism of both adults and children. If that's something you're sensitive to, this is not for you. This topic's not for you. This video's not for you. Totally understand. It was nice meeting you. See you later. I also want to say, I have the utmost regard and respect for this story. I think it is a very important one to delve, not just for American history, but also for California history, which I'm a native of. I love my state, and I just want to emphasize that I have the utmost regard and respect for this story. I may deal with or say things in like a silly or kind of goofy, funny way sometimes, but know that this is a real story about real people, and I'm taking this very, very seriously. I'm a sucker for stories about the indomitable human spirit, and I love my fellow humans, which is why I'm a historian in the first place. Nobody tells you that when you record a YouTube video, you get real thirsty. I'm not, I think I'm like 5 minutes in. How long? Yeah, 6 minutes. If you hear any noises or scratching in the background, I have two cats who share this room with me. And also, I'm awkwardly holding this mic because my husband has his mic attached to a stand, and I wasn't gonna stand over here like with this mic right here, and I wasn't gonna do that. I'm also gonna try to stop moving around, but sorry, I gotta move around. So I've been interested in the Donner Party story for as long as I can remember. As I said earlier, I'm a California native, so this story was something I feel like most of us were taught. Although, after talking to my friends about this and like forcing them to listen to the inner thoughts in my head about the Donner Party, I came to realize that not everybody learned this, which was kind of surprising to me because I thought that this was something that we all talked about here, but maybe it was just my mom. I don't know. So, anyway, I read the book, The Indifferent Stars Above by Daniel James Brown. Highly recommend. It's an incredible book. It's really well researched. It's really well written. And I feel like he really like puts you in the space of like, you are literally on the wagon train with these people. You feel it. Like, it's like you can feel the dirt in between your fingernails the way that he talks about it. It's incredible. Highly recommend it. He also like really goes in depth on like stuff that I don't know if I'm going to talk about here. So like he talks a lot about what they brought and like what their wagons had in them and everything like that. Point is, he's super detailed. Highly recommend reading it. It's an amazing book. If you're like not into historical writing, I recommend that one as your first because you don't even feel like you're reading a historical book. It literally feels like you're just reading a story. Anyway, okay, so now all that out of the way, some 10 minutes that I've just been talking. I mean, I warned you I like to yap. Let's start along the Illinois River, April 12th, 1846. Sarah Graves was the first living child born to parents Franklin and Elizabeth Graves. She had 8 siblings altogether, all with her, the youngest being around a year old. Her father, Franklin, he is a pivotal man in the story and is known to be a strong, capable man, definitely when it comes to surviving on the frontier. He's my goat. He's my personal favorite in this story. I love Franklin Graves. His neighbors all liked him. They were really sad to see them go. Franklin and Elizabeth were both like really capable people. They traded along the river with their neighbors and they just loved to help people out. I love this family. Sarah, however, was at the crossroads of the rest of her life. She had just gotten engaged. She was 21 years old and she just got engaged to a man named Jay Fosdick. And she was torn because he wasn't really sure if he was going to go to California or if he was going to stay back home with his family in Illinois, because I think he was the only son, or like I think he had a younger brother, but he wasn't quite old enough to start working on the orchard with his dad. So Jay was kind of like, well, I can't really leave my dad here by himself. My brother's not old enough to take on the orchard, so somebody's got to stay with the old man. So Sarah wasn't quite sure what she was going to do yet. Her choices were either stay with her new husband or go with her family and, you know, the people she's known her whole life. And I have to say, as the oldest and the eldest daughter, I empathize with this so much because on the one hand, your siblings that you've watched literally grow up in front of your eyes, it's like, do I really watch essentially my own children leave and never see them again? Because keep in mind, if they go and Sarah doesn't go with them, she's not going to see them again. Like, that's it. There's no hopping on a plane and flying from Illinois to California. You have to go by wagon, okay? So if her siblings leave, she's not going to see him again. Or her other option is stay with the man that she's going to get married to. And as a married woman myself, there's definitely a little bit of guilt, you know, when you get married and have to leave her family behind. So I totally understand and empathize with her. She's kind of like our main heroine in this story. The whole book is kind of told through her perspective. And I really appreciated that about this book, just because, just seeing this experience through the eyes of a woman, I feel like is something that is really lacking in history. I mean, it's kind of becoming more and more of a thing now. Like, I mean, me specifically, I did a lot of like women's studies and gender studies when I was getting my bachelor's. So it's definitely becoming more and more of a thing. But I think any story told from the perspective of a woman offers a really unique perspective. And honestly, I mean, I feel like they kind of see things really as it is, like, because they're really in the shit. I'm already getting sidetracked. I literally warned you guys that I was just going to go off topic. I have this whole script and I think I've only read maybe a paragraph of it. Yeah, anyway, let's keep pushing. Let's keep it pushing. Now, before we start this journey, I think it's important to highlight the why they're going, okay? Why are they leaving everything behind? All their friends, their neighbors, their land. Why are they leaving it? So there's a few compounding circumstances that are all compiled to make staying just as hard as leaving, okay? Franklin originally moved his family to Illinois from New England for the chance to become like a pretty wealthy farmer. Like that was kind of his goal. He wanted to own his own land and like farm his own crop. He was in his farmer era or whatever. And he did. I mean, he was good at it. I can't lie. The first few years on their farm saw really healthy crops of wheat sprout up from the land around the river. In the spring of 1837, just 6 years after their arrival in Illinois, the United States experienced a real estate crash. I mean, as she loves to do. So it was so bad. This I didn't even know. It would almost rival the Great Depression, the one that everybody, if you went to school in America, you know about the Great Depression. Okay, I promise you. Investors, spurred on by the promise of explosive growth in railroads and canals and everything like that, they just bought land in places that didn't exist. So they were like, oh, shit's about to pop off over there in the Midwest. I'm going to buy land early and make all my money. Did not happen. Okay. None of these investments came to fruition. It caused economic collapse. It was really difficult for all sectors of the American economy, even agriculture. So the Graves family and others like them turned to like substance farming and bartering. So like they grew enough crops to kind of feed their families and like trade with their neighbors. Basically, that's what they did, because that's how bad it was. So economic circumstances definitely led to Franklin feeling that urge of like, I got to get out of here, because that's kind of just what he did. He's the type of person who's, if shit starts going sideways, he's going to look for something else. So it did not help. I'm going to introduce our villain now to this story. So it didn't help that Lansford Hastings, he wrote a book called The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. I will post a picture right here of the cover. It's like a little pamphlet, little booklet that went around. Because at this time, people are traveling. They're going on the Oregon Trail, and they're leaving the Midwest or all over the United States at the time, which is only up until the Mississippi River. They hadn't expanded outward yet. So they're all getting in their little wagons, and they're going across the frontier in California, all those places over there. So he publishes this book in Cincinnati, 1845. I really want to highlight this. While he was an extensive traveler of Oregon and California, this guy was a lawyer. Okay? A lawyer, cosplaying as a mountaineer, with the intention of building up a reputation amongst wagon train travelers that he could then like turn and become a politician with. Because that's just what you did. That's just what you did. You just lied. You got on, not even the internet, you got on the freaking newspaper and you lied to people so that then you could then become a politician, which, I mean, I guess nothing's really changed in that regard. Along with lying to a bunch of people, he was also a racist, like most people at this time. This is America before the Civil War. Not that racism isn't alive and well in America today. It definitely is. It's never died. But at this time, especially, Civil War hasn't happened yet. It's the 1840s. Okay, so keep that in mind. The biggest takeaway I ever had in my first American history class in college, I'm telling you, community college, my first 2 years of college, my professor said, this was not that long ago, when talking about stuff like slavery and the Civil War. And it like really put into perspective that like, no, this stuff really was not that long ago. I mean, a lot of people living today have parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who experienced slavery, which is why history is so important. Talking to your elders is very important, because getting their histories and getting their stories, that's how you keep the memories of the terrible shit that happened alive, because you should never forget stuff like that. Okay. I'm still not on track, but I'm trying to lock in here. Okay. We're going to keep going on this detour. Okay. We're going to set up some dominoes that are going to fall. So back to our homie Lansford Hastings, the guy who wrote that guidebook. He was in California at the time. He was trying to get people to come to California because he wanted to sell some land. And again, he wanted to like become a politician. So he wanted to like get people over there so that then he could get them to vote for him or whatever. So while he was over there, he was meeting with a man named John Sutter, which, all my Californians, if you paid attention in your history classes, specifically 4th grade, would be a nice surprise. He was meeting with a man named John Sutter. Okay. So that name should ring a bell to you because, you know, California Gold Rush, the kind of thing that we're known for, Sutter's Mill, that's that guy. Okay. So he was involved in that gold rush. This is literally 4th grade social studies. Okay. John Sutter, keep that man's name in mind. He's going to come up like 3 or 4 times. Okay. Those two men, Sutter and Hastings, they're plotting. Okay. They see all these people coming along the Oregon and California Trail and they see dollar signs because they're thinking these people are going to need a place to live. These people are going to want land. They're going to need to build houses. They're going to need livestock. They're going to need people to work on their ranches, whatever. And so they're like, how can we exploit these people to get money from them? Hastings is promising some 20,000 people are on their way right now, California. They're going to need land. Who owns all that land? Be one guess. Who owns all the land right now in California? John Sutter. Okay. Do you see why they're cooking up some heinous shit, right? They're going to be willing to lie, cheat, and steal to get these people California, and it's going to lead to all the stuff that happens later. They are cooking up some heinous shit. Hastings says in his guide, he can shave off 700 miles off the typical route into California. I'm going to include a map. The established route through California, it goes through all of these upper states, okay? His route, it splits right over here. I forget the state. I think it's Wyoming. It splits in Wyoming, and then it goes down through the Wasatch Mountains, through the Great Salt Lake Basin, through the Nevada desert, and then it meets back up again right before you get into California, and then it goes through Donner Pass, as it's now called. He creates this cutoff, and I want you to understand that he didn't travel this cutoff. He just looked at some paper maps and said, that looks about right. Yeah, I think you can cut through there and save like 700 miles off that trip. That's all he did. He just looked at some hand-drawn paper maps and said, looks good to me. Okay. So remember how I said he had never taken his own path when he created it? That part's actually true. He did not go through there at all until 1846, which is when our story began. This is the same time that the Donners set off on the Donners and the Graves and the Reeds and the whole team. Okay. We're going to find out there's 87 people on this train, and they're in 2 separate groups right now. They don't meet up until they get into Nevada. So we're going to be talking about them because they're in separate parts. April 11th, 1846, Lansford Hastings leaves California to go east. He's going to travel his cutoff going east just so he can kind of see what it's like. And he's also planning on stopping people along the way to be like, hey, you guys should come take my cutoff, and then I'm going to lead you to California, and then you're going to buy land from my friend and make both of us rich. Ignore that last part. So we're back with Sarah. Let's get back on track. Let's get back to it. Sarah is on the brink of making her big decision, right? She has to decide if she's going to go with her siblings or if she's going to stay here with her fiance, husband-to-be. Lucky for her, that fiance, now husband, decides he's going to go to California. Woo! Yay! She didn't have to make the choice. Her man made it for her. We love it. We love to see it. So anyway, he decides he's going to leave his family behind and travel with Sarah and her siblings, and they're going to go to California. So April 12th, 1846, they decide they're going to leave, and they have all their stuff packed up, and they're leaving. So if you are familiar with the wagon trains at all, you know that there is one main jumping point that everybody goes to, and that is Independence, Missouri. Congratulations if you got that one right. That is the biggest town that a lot of people would go to. It had the most supplies, and people would stock up on stuff that they needed when they were on the trail. That's where everybody went. The Graves family did not go there. They went to St. Joe, which I didn't even know was a thing before I read this book. I honestly thought that everybody and their mom went to Independence, Missouri. But no, I guess they also went to St. Joe, which is like a little bit further north of Independence, Missouri. It's close to like the main route that they're going to take, the Great Platte River Road. That's the road that they take, which I think is an interstate now. I don't know which one. If I find out which one while I'm editing it, I'll include the name of it here because that's actually really common. A lot of like trains and trails that people used like way back when before there were paved roads, they just got turned into highways and freeways like the 101 here in California. Like whenever you see those, I'm going to sidetrack. We're not going to talk about that. Our Graves family is on their way to St. Joe, Missouri, and it took them forever to get there. Okay. The spring and the winter of that year was like super wet, a lot of storms, and it made travel really difficult. The wagons needed to be double teamed. Bridges needed to be built over streams and creeks. And then whenever there was a body of water that was too big for them to cross, they had to find a ferryman that had to find him first, pay him, and then get their wagons across the biggest, like the bigger body of water. Mud and dirt was with them all the time, which for somebody who really hates to be dirty, it just sounds like super heinous to me. I can't even imagine being covered in mud and dirt all the time. I would lose it. The Graves family had 13 members in their initial party. So they had the heads of the house, Franklin and Elizabeth. Hopefully I can find pictures of them. It's kind of difficult to find pictures of them. And then they had Sarah, who was their firstborn, and then her husband, Jay. And then they had Marianne, Billy, Eleanor, Lavina, Nancy, Jonathan, Franklin Jr., and the baby Elizabeth. Okay. They just like ran out of names. And so then they gave their last two names their own names, which I think is kind of funny. Like, why don't we name people after, why don't like moms name their kids after them anymore? I don't understand. Another person that they had tagging along with them is John Snyder. He's important. I have a picture of him. I'm going to include it right here. So he's important for later, but he's a bachelor who tagged along essentially to get passage into California in exchange for helping out with the wagon train because you needed a lot of strong people. I mean, mainly, I'm going to be honest, a lot of strong men to drive these wagon trains because it's like a lot of heavy lifting. You need kind of a whole team to get across the plains. And so what a lot of single men would do is they would join up with families and be like, hey, if you can get me to California, I will help you pull your wagons and set up camp every night and get firewood and kill game for you. I mean, not that bad of a trade-off, I think. So all told, they had 3 wagons. One was driven by Franklin and Elizabeth. The other was driven by Sarah and Jay. And then the third was driven by John Snyder. The spring weather had started to warm up. Everyone was in high spirits. Everyone was super excited. And, you know, like the beginning of a really long road trip, you're like, road. You're like super excited to be on the road and you're like looking at all the sights and everything's all exciting. And then by like hour 6, you're like, please get me out of the car right now. I'm sick of everybody in this car and I really have to pee. Yeah, they're in the first part of that road trip. Okay. Sarah actually considered this her bride tour, which is, I guess, something that women at this time did. I guess you can kind of call it a honeymoon. That's like their version of it, at least. But like they didn't use honeymoon in the way that we use it now. They would, what we call a honeymoon, they would call a bride tour or a bride journey. And she was like, oh, yeah, we're just going on a little tour. We're just going to look at, you know, all the frontier. And then we're going to go on our way to California. You don't even know what's in store for you. You have no clue. So they continue on their way to St. Joe. Okay, May 12th. I thought about having a calendar up because I'm going to be throwing a lot of dates at you. And for that, I am sorry. But I just kind of wanted to keep my timeline on track. And, you know, it might put things into better perspective for you, just how long these people were out there. Because keep in mind, we're in May 12th. Okay. May 12th. By the time everything wraps up and this ends, we're going to be in April of the next year. Okay. So I'm going to keep the months and dates in here. It's not important for you to remember them. I'm not going to quiz you. Boring. May 12th. The Reed family is making their own preparations for a trip to California. They left out of Independence, the place that I said everybody leaves out of. They left out of Independence. So James Reed was fairly wealthy. He had a pretty large wagon for his wife. Her name's Margaret. And there are 5 kids to travel in. So James Reed brought his wife, his 5 kids, their 5 dogs, his mother-in-law, so Margaret's mom, and then they had a couple teamsters as well. Teamsters are basically people who help out. Like I think you pay them. I'll have to look into that and see if you pay them. 'Cause I'm not entirely sure like what the difference between like just a bachelor on the wagon train versus like a teamster is. If somebody knows and they want to correct me, please tell me what the difference is, because they're referred to as 2 separate things. There's like bachelors who are on the road with them, who are by themselves, and then teamsters who are like specifically with these like families. Like the Reeds have teamsters, the Donners have teamsters, that kind of thing. James Reed had this giant wagon for his wife and his family to travel in, because Margaret had basically what at the time were called sick headaches, which I think are basically just migraines. She had really bad migraines, and that's kind of why they were going to California, because a lot of people at the time believed that migraines and headaches and stuff like that was a result of really bad, stinky air. And so they were like, if we get to California, the air is going to be much cleaner. And it's going to be so nice out there. We're going to be by the ocean. It's going to help you, girl. So that's why they were going. Anyway, so like I said, they had children. They had Margaret's mom, cook, servant, couple teamsters as part of their group. So traveling with the Reeds at this time from the jump are 2 brothers, George Donner, Jacob Donner, which is where the party gets its name from, because they elect George Donner as their leader. This is much later down the line, but like it's remembered because of these guys. So George is in his early 60s and he has 5 daughters and he has a wife named Tamsin. He's been married 3 times. This is wife number 3. Okay. Jacob is 56. He has his wife Elizabeth, and they have 7 children between them, because some of them are Elizabeth's from a previous marriage, and then some of them are Jacob's. So between the 2 of them, they have 7. These people had a lot of kids. There's a lot of kids back there, a lot of kids. And like I said earlier, similarly to the Reeds, they had their own group of teamsters to watch over their livestock and drive their 2 extra wagons. So you need a lot of people to travel across the plains. Okay. This is going to seem like a really insignificant date, but I promise you it's important for a side quest later, okay? May 13th, Congress officially declares war on Mexico after there's like a series of battles in Texas. And also they were plotting to take California by force because Mexico didn't want to sell it, because why would you want to sell California? So the United States is like, okay, fine, we're going to take it then. And they just go to war. And that's it. It's important for later. Okay, May 19th. The Donners and Reeds, they are traveling in a different wagon party compared to our Graves family. They're headed west, and they have not met the Graves yet, and they're not going to meet them for some time. I'm going to try to tell these stories in parallel to each other. The Donners and Reeds are ahead of the Graves by, I think, a couple days, maybe even a whole week. But the point is, they're ahead of them. So since our wagon party is just walking through Iowa right now, we'll check back in with Lansford Hastings and see where he's at in his cutoff route. Okay, May 20th. He had successfully crossed the Sierra Nevada going east. He struggled with horses, pack mules. He struggled basically the entire time. His goal was, like I said earlier, to intercept some people who were going to Oregon and California and see if he can convince them to come with him so that, you know, him and his homie John Sutter can sell them some land. He is traveling with a renowned mountaineer by the name of James Clyman. I'm going to have a picture of James Clyman. I'm going to put all my pictures right here. So anyway, James Clyman, renowned mountaineer, knew the area better than anybody else, at least for... Anyway, James Clyman, he knew the area better than anyone else, at least for an American. Obviously, the native tribes, they knew their lands better than anybody, but James Clyman, he knew them pretty well. Hastings' goal was to travel his supposed route for himself. They camped at the intersection of the established route and the, I guess, for him, the end point of his shortcut, basically, but he's going backwards. So they camped at where his cutoff route would end, and it would join back up with the main route. So James Clyman thought that this route was going to save very little, if any, time, and that the journey was going to be terrible, that the terrain was going to be shit. And he let Hastings know that this journey was going to be terrible, the train was going to be ass, and this is not a good route to take. Hastings doesn't give a shit. So around the same time, the Graves finally make it to St. Joe, and they're stocking up for their journey to go west. I could totally get into what they brought, but I'm gonna be 100% honest with you. I think most of you would not be interested in hearing about the stuff that they brought. Just know that they brought a shit ton. Imagine if you had to go through all of your belongings and you had to pick only the stuff that you could fit in your car. Which, I mean, I guess a lot of people have done that, but I'm talking everything. There's no going back for it. You need to pick what you're going to take, and you need to just stick with that because you're not coming back for any of it. With their wagons loaded on ferries and crossing the Missouri River heading west, they left the United States behind. I do have all the pieces of advice that Lansford Hastings wrote in his guide. The biggest piece of advice that was neglected by the Graves and the Reeds and the Donners is, and this is a direct quote, I'm just going to read it, okay? Enter on their journey on or before the first day of May, after which time they must never start if it can possibly be avoided. Basically, to translate that into modern day, do not leave after the 1st of May, otherwise you're going to have a bad time. Hastings also warned that unless you cross the mountains, the Sierra Nevadas, in the early fall, the snow and the mountains are going to become impassable. I mean, as I'm sure you've heard me saying all these dates, and as I literally just said, they left, well, after May 1st. They left like 2 or 3 weeks after May 1st. So they're going to have a bad time. Their official start date was May 23rd. So a whole 23 days after May 1st. So yeah, 3 weeks. The landscape that they were facing was open, covered in grass as tall as their waists, and very wet. Thunderstorms were all over the plains. They may travel very slow. May 29th, James Reed's mother-in-law, so this is Margaret's mom, she passes away. She was like an old lady. She knew that she was going to die soon. And she didn't really want to see California. It's just that like her daughter was leaving. And so she was like, hey, I'm at the end of my life anyway. Can you just load me up in the wagon? And then when I die, just like pick a spot to bury me at, because like I'm not going to die in my house by myself, which like I really respect that. But then like on the other hand, if they had waited, like if they just kind of stuck around until she had passed away, you know, they might not have been stuck in the snow and the mountains. But you know, that's neither here nor there. Life on the trail, at least like the plains portion, so this is like the early beginning part, is super boring, very monotonous. They're doing the same thing day after day. There were like little flirtations and romances to be had on the trail because the dating pool was like literally insanely small. Like you're traveling with the same people for months at a time, and obviously you get bored. So they would literally pick like a semi-private patch of tall grass, just roll around in, if you catch my drift. The author actually has a really interesting section in the book on like sex and contraception at this time. But I wasn't sure how to include it in here because like one, it's kind of weird to just like go into this little sidebar and talk about it. And two, I didn't want to get in trouble with Papa YouTube because this is literally my first video. So like, I don't know what I can and can't talk about. But like, this story literally includes cannibalism. So like, I don't know. Anyway, read the book if you really want to hear about it. It's very interesting. The going at this time was so easy that Tamsin Donner wrote letters back home. And I'm just going to read this quote to you because like like when we have some more hindsight, we're going to come back and it's just so tragic. She said, direct quote, "Indeed, if I do not experience something far worse than I have yet done, I shall say the whole trouble is in getting started," which is so foreboding. Some foreshadowing for real. Okay, so we are going to skip ahead to June 27th. Okay, we're skipping like a month ahead. The Donners arrive in Fort Laramie in Wyoming. James Kleiman, the mountaineer that I mentioned earlier, he split from Hastings after realizing just how shit the new route was. And he was there to warn people. Yes, he was. He was going to tell people that this route is shit. Don't go this way. Okay. So, funnily enough, and this connection is actually so crazy, I was shocked. Okay. Kleiman and James Reed, who is the leader of his family with the mother-in-law who just passed, they knew each other like pretty freaking well because they had served alongside Abraham freaking Lincoln in the Black Hawk Wars, which is another series of wars that they had with the native tribes, because that is the theme of American history at this time. Okay. And I mean, for all of its conception, really. But point is, he knew this man very well. And they just like ran into each other in Wyoming, which I live in the same town as like my best friends, and I have to make plans to see them. And you're telling me he just ran into this man in Wyoming, of all places? Anyway, so James Kleinman's telling his homie, bro, do not take that route. It's like really bad. The terrain is shit. Your wagons are gonna get stuck. Just do yourself a favor and don't do it, okay? And Reed's like, okay, whatever. I'm not gonna listen to you because I'm James Reed and I can do whatever I want. And that's essentially what happened. Like verbatim, that's what happened. They split. Kleiman gives his homie his warning. James Reed ignores it and he keeps it pushing. Kleiman is like, well, I got to warn other people about this. So he just keeps it going and he's still traveling east and he's warning other people. He encounters Franklin Graves as well. We don't know exactly what was said, but like we know that they met and he like probably gave him the same warning that he gave James Reed, which is essentially don't take this cutoff because it's terrible. So July 3rd, the Graves arrive at Fort Laramie and they kind of rest up a little bit because the next day is July 4th and they call it, I'm not even kidding you, they refer to it as the Glorious Fourth. Because keep in mind, this is like maybe 1 or 2 generations removed from the Revolutionary War. So it's still very serious for them. It's very serious. So they're celebrating with beef. They're cooking up their best cuts. They're having pies. They're having treats, dessert, whatever. They're drinking up all their whiskey. And then they partied up on the 4th. And then literally the next day, no time for hangovers, July 5th, they're on the road again. Now we're going to talk about the conditions on the trail because they are literally so heinous. Like, I can't even begin to imagine it. Like, you know how some people are always like, oh, I was born in the wrong time. I was meant to live in another era. Not me, babes, okay? I love indoor plumbing. I love HVAC. I love getting in my little car, in my air-conditioned car, and I like driving to the store and hanging out with my friends and getting little drinks, and I can't. I can't do that. Refrigeration, bug spray, sunscreen. The fact that they can't take a shower, I can't even imagine it. The weather would literally swing between 110 during the day, 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Hopefully I remember, and I will include that in Celsius for my Celsius friends, I guess. And then it would get freezing at night because, it's like flat ground in the plains and whatnot. So it would get super hot during the day, super cold at night. The water was poison. Yellow jackets and mosquitoes were everywhere. Ticks were in the grass. And there were gnats called buffalo gnats, which alone should tell you that it's fucking heinous and terrible. I need to read this footnote from the book, okay? Just give me like 2 seconds. I'm going to grab my book and read this footnote because it's actually crazy. Give me a second. We are back with my copy of my book, okay? I'm going to read this footnote to you. These tiny, humped-back, blood-sucking flies attack both livestock and humans. Their bites sometimes cause severe pain and swelling in sensitive humans, and badly bitten livestock sometimes die as a result of acute toxemia or anaphylactic shock. Occasionally, they die of asphyxiation, literally suffocated by the masses of insects clogging their throats and nostrils. No thanks. No thank you. I'm very happy here with my off bug spray and my citronella candles. Thanking you. Okay. So I've mentioned some of the other families. I mentioned like the big 3 families that were on this wagon train. I'm going to bring up some of the other ones now because, as I said, there's 87 people all told. So let's talk about some of these other ones, okay? Lewis and Philippine Keseberg were part of the Donner train like pretty early on. They just kind of tagged along. They had a young daughter, and Philippine, she just had a son. Her husband, Lewis, is very important. Later on, he is a very important character. But I just want you to know that this guy was not liked from the jump. People saw him like not being nice to his wife, and like people straight up called him like a wife beater. He was not a good person. This guy's not a good person, and he's going to get worse. As they pushed on, I think, okay, this might sound it's going to come out a little confusing, but I'm going to introduce these families that are a part of this train as they are introduced in the book. So I think it's kind of going like chronologically when they decide to join the train. So I'm going to probably be jumping around between who's joining and where they're going. So it's going to come out like a little jumbled, but like, I'm sorry for that. I don't know a better way to do this. So as they pushed on, the grass began to grow sparser and thinner. And the author of this book, Daniel James Brown, he refers to the grasses of the plains as the gasoline of the mid 19th century. Because without grass, like your livestock just dies, and then you don't have anything to pull your oxen. And people began to offload pretty much anything that they didn't deem necessary. Like as their journey would go on, things that they thought were important in Independence, Missouri would get thrown out like pretty quickly. Because if it was weighing down the oxen and they weren't pulling it as efficiently as they were, maybe 30 miles back, they were going to get rid of it. Now, what I'm about to say to y'all is so damn twisted. I might keep that part in. We'll see. This next part that I'm going to get into is so sick and twisted. Like, it's actually crazy. So, July 11th, travelers began to encounter just a man chilling on the trail. And he had an open letter from Hastings telling people to hurry up Fort Bridger because they're going to get him as their personal guide through his cutoff. So while he's waiting for people to show up, he's hanging out with the people who own Fort Bridger. Fort Bridger is owned and operated by these two guys, Jim Bridger and Luis Vasquez. He's telling them, so Hastings is telling them the same stuff that he's telling John Sutter back in California. Basically, thousands of people are going to come through here and they're going to need supplies and they're going to need a place to rest. And I'm going to make that your fort. They're all going to stop at your fort. And so these guys, they had kind of been struggling with their fort in the past. And so this sounded like a really good idea to them. They were like, yeah, if you can bring a bunch of people through here, that's going to be great for us. So a few days after Hastings had enough people to kind of head out. So he was like, okay, well, time to go. So he takes enough people and they like go on his little cutoff. The Donners and the Graves don't make it in time to go with him directly, but they were only like a couple days ride behind him. Like they could send somebody with a horse and they would be there in a couple hours. Like they weren't that far behind him. So July 18th, the Donners and the Reeds are camping at a place called the Parting of the Ways, which it's still called that to this day. This is where the cutoff splits from the main Oregon and California trail. And when they set out on that trail, it literally, that's it. Their fate is sealed. And I mean, as the kids say, they're cooked. I've been talking for 47 minutes. That's crazy. That's a lot even for me. The Donner Party at this time had the 16 Donners, so that's George and Jacob's families, 5 Reeds. I don't think that's right. I thought they had 5 kids. I might have to correct that. Our party at this time had 16 Donners, that's George and Jacob's families, 6 Reeds, James Reed, his wife Margaret, their kids, 9 Breens, that's Patrick and Margaret, or Peggy Breen, and their 7 kids, 4 of the Eddies, that's William Eddy, his wife Eleanor, and their 2 kids, and then 6 Murphys. The Murphy family is led by a widow, actually. Her name is Lavina Murphy. She brought along her 2 married daughters and their families. Her 2 daughters are Sarah Foster and Harriet Pike. There's 4 Kesebergs, which is the family I talked about earlier. 2 Wolfingers. They're just a married couple, no kids. They're just tagging along. And then there was also a couple bachelors as well. There's Charles Stanton, John Denton, Mr. Hardcoop, Joseph Reinhardt, and Patrick Dolan. The Donner also had some Teamsters with them, and their names were Samuel Shoemaker, Noah James, a man named Antonio, no last name given, his name is just Antonio, and Augustus Spitzer. The Reed Teamsters were a man named Milt Elliott, James Smith, Walter Heron, and then they also had 2 servants, Bayless Williams, who was like just like their servant, I guess, like he just kind of did stuff for them, and then his half-sister, Eliza, she was their cook. The Donners would also pick up William and Amanda McCutcheon and their infant daughter named Harriet. They added a boy named also added a boy named Jean-Baptiste Trudeau, and all the French people. Please leave me alone. Anyway, he's a self-proclaimed mountaineer who lost his parents, he says, This is all from him. He says that he's a mountaineer and that he lost his parents in attacks from native tribes. But like, there's no way to confirm if that's true or not. And then they also picked up a boy named Luke. He had TB, and his family just straight up abandoned him on the trail. It's not funny, but like, it's great. Poor boy had TB, and they just left him on the side of the road, and the Donners picked him up because they felt bad. So Tamsin Donner, I mentioned her earlier. That's George's wife. She was like super vocal about not going on the cutoff, and she wanted to take the established path. Because she just seemed to have this intuition that shit was going to go sideways and that they should just take the established path. But obviously nobody listened to her because they just didn't listen to her. The men wanted to go this way, and one woman objecting to that was not going to change their mind. So then a couple days later, on August 2nd, the Graves got to Fort Bridger, and they were also hoping to catch up to Hastings, but they had just missed him. The Donners left a couple days before the Graves. They left on July 31st. So they still weren't together at this point. They joined up later. The fort itself is not that impressive. It's a pretty small one, just kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And it was run by those two guys I mentioned earlier. And they had supplies for sale at like a crazy markup because they're like the only spot for miles where you can buy stuff. And so they just charged whatever they wanted. But the most important thing, or the most important service that they offered, was that they let people trade their livestock. So like, if your livestock was super sick and tired from traveling on the plains for the past few months, they would take your old livestock and then like give you fresh one to like go with you. And they would just trade. So that was pretty cool. And then they also like would let the rest of their livestock just kind of graze plains and eat grass, and they would fill up their water, that kind of thing. They just kind of rested there for a bit. So remember when I said that we were going to get to the super heinous thing, and I was like setting it up? Here's the super heinous thing. So Bridger and Vasquez told James Reed that the road ahead was, and I quote, a fine and level road with plenty of water and grass, which was a total fucking lie. He was like straight up lying to this man. It was not a nice road. It's shit. And that's like telling somebody, the best example, this is the example I gave in my script. That's like telling somebody that the I-5 in California is like this super beautiful, lush green highway like Highway 1, which is like along the coast. Completely different, two different places, not alike each other at all. It's like saying that the I-5 has a beautiful coastal view when it does not. It's ugly. The other super heinous thing that they did was they withheld letters from James Reed that were meant for him. So James Reed had another friend up ahead on the road. His name was Edwin Bryant, and he had been writing letters and sending them back to Fort Bridger with the intention that James Reed would get them and read them and not take the cutoff. These two men took his letters, opened them, read them, and then were like, yeah, so we're just not going to give these letters to him, because if we, like, what's the word? If we discourage them from traveling on this route, more people are not going to want to take this route, and then we're going to lose our fort. So like, they're driven once again by money, because capitalism is the root of all evil. Franklin Graves also had no idea that shit was crazy on the cutoff. He had no clue, because if they didn't even tell James Reed and give him his letters, they weren't going to tell Franklin Graves. Oh my God, bro. Franklin Graves didn't get this information either, because if James Reed didn't get it, Franklin wasn't going to get it. So up until this point, it had been pretty smooth sailing in terms of like injuries and stuff like that. Like, the only death so far was James Reed's mother-in-law. And the next injury is actually, it's really, really heinous and crazy. So 13-year-old Eddie Breen, he was like riding on his horse in the plains, and his horse, like, its little hoof got caught in like a hole, and it threw him from the horse, and he snapped his lower leg on the impact, and the bone was like sticking out of the skin, and it was like really gross. But the only reason why I even included this story is because they send for help to Fort Bridger, right? And Fort Bridger sends this like really old mountain man to come like help, I guess. I don't know. I guess it was like the closest thing to a doctor for miles. And so this guy, he's smoking tobacco out of his pipe, and he's like, takes one look at that leg, and he gets his knife out, and he's like, yep, the leg got to come off. And his parents are like, they could not bear to see their poor son's leg get chopped off. So they just kind of paid him and like sent him on his way. And I guess on the way out, he says this in the book. I guess like the guy on his way out was like complaining that he couldn't flex his knife skills. He just really wanted to chop that kid's leg off. I just thought that was funny. Okay. Getting back to the path. August 6th, they enter the Wasatch Mountain Range. Okay. They find a note in some scrub brush that was like 2 to 3 days old, and it's from Hastings. And he's like, hey, this path really sucks for wagons. You probably shouldn't take the path that I took. So if you guys could send somebody up on horseback, and then I will tell them where to go, and it'll be like a lot better of a path, go ahead and do that. So then they send some men on horseback. James Reed and a couple guys go on horseback. And as they're going through this pass, they see just how fucking god awful this path is for wagons. Because the benefit of the wagon train, obviously, other than having a bunch of people around you, is that the path is established. So there's like actual wagon train marks and like a very clear path for you to follow, because other people before you have already shifted the earth to make it easier for their wagon to go across. And because this was like the first inaugural voyage of this cutoff, they didn't have that benefit. They literally, before they got to this point, before they even got to this part in the mountains, they lost a wagon off of a cliff, and the wagon still had oxen attached to it. Like the ox couldn't pull it up the wagon was too heavy, so the oxen couldn't pull it up this hill that they were trying to cross. And so the wagon rolled back and pulled all the ox with it. Like, it was crazy. So they get this note, and they decide to send James Reed, Charles Stanton, and William Pike to go meet up with Hastings and get some better directions. And like I said, on the way, they're looking at this path and they're like, this is terrible. Like, there's no way that we could have made it through here with these wagons. So as they're traveling, they finally get to him, and they finally meet Lansford Hastings in the flesh. Okay. They meet our villain, and they basically tell him like, hey, motherfucker, you better come back with us. And like you said, and take us on a better route, because what the fuck was all that bullshit back there that we just passed? That's actually verbatim what they said. Hastings was not about to do that. He was not going to go back and go through that shit again. So he's just like standing with them on a hill, and he's like pointing, and he's like, yeah, I think if you go up those hills, like over there, it should be fine. You guys should be fine. But I don't know for sure. So good luck, I guess. Reed and his little group of men, they get the directions from Hastings, and then they go back to their group, and they get back to them on August 10th. And that has when the Graves family finally caught up. And they all decided to travel together. So with this new path kind of vaguely in mind, they traveled through this thick-ass vegetation for like 5 whole days before the wagons got completely stuck. So then Franklin Graves, Jay Fosdick, Billy Graves, and a couple other of the men, they went on to like painstakingly dig a road that the wagons could go on. And it took them 3 whole days to dig that road. They struggled through these mountains for even more days after that. They finally cleared the Wasatch Mountains on August 21st, and they could look out across the Salt Lake Valley. It took them 16 days to go 35 miles. It was only supposed to take them 1 week. And they still had to go 40 miles through the Great Salt Lake Desert, and then a few hundred miles across Nevada. Then they would be at the base of the Sierra Nevadas. Oh, and the kid that the Donners picked up that had TB, he finally died on August 25th, and they buried him in the desert. So that's death number 2 out of 47. Also, remember how I just said they had 40 miles to go? I lied. It's actually more like double that. Well, I didn't lie. Lansford Hastings lied, but whatever. The point is, they had like 80-something miles to go. 80-something miles. September 2nd, the party gets to a natural spring at the base of Pilot Peak in Nevada. The Reeds had lost all but 1 cow and 1 ox and had to abandon all of their stuff. And the Graves also lost a large part of their livestock to the desert. September 10th, the party realized that they didn't have enough food to complete this whole journey, and it was starting to snow at the peaks. And so they sent 2 men from their group, Charles Stanton and William McCutcheon. They sent them off to California ahead on horseback to ask the man, the myth, the legend, John Sutter, for more supplies. couple days after that, September 26th, the group finally joins the main wagon trail, completing Hastings cutoff. It took them 68 days to reach that spot. If they took the tried and true path, it would have taken them as little as 37 days. The cutoff added around a month and 125 miles to an already delayed journey. It was supposed to save them. Remember, Lansford Hastings thought that this cutoff would save people 700 miles. It actually added 125 miles to this journey. He is the villain in this story. Okay. We're getting to a very important day. October 5th. This is a huge day in this story, okay? I want you to really lock in for this. October 5th. James Reed and John Snyder. John Snyder is he's a teamster for the Graves. They're trying to get their wagon up a steep hill, and they kind of end up, they get all tangled up. The wagons get all tangled up. The ox get all tangled up. And they get into like a little bit of a road rage fight, and they start to argue. They get in each other's faces. John Snyder has his whip. James Reed pulls a knife. They start fighting. And to make a long story short, James Reed stabs John Snyder in the chest and he dies. And this is a big deal, obviously, because Reed just like straight up murdered a guy. And like he wasn't really well liked. And John Snyder was really well liked. And so imagine the biggest asshole you know who's leading your group kills the one guy that everybody likes. So they were all arguing like what to do with him. They were like, okay, we can't have a murderer in our midst. So like, what should we do? Do we hang him? Do we kill him? Like just shoot him? Or do we banish him? Whatever. So in the end, they can't bear to like, they didn't want to like enact justice without any sort of like formal trial. So they kind of just decide to banish him from the group with no weapons or provisions or anything. They just send him off with his horse, which is essentially a death sentence at this time. Later that night, his family kind of snuck him some stuff, just so that he wouldn't be completely empty-handed. But on the morning of October 6th, he was gone. He is, in fact, he's going to come back again, but he's got some side quests to do. He is going to go on his own journey, but we will see James Reed again. Trust on that. 2 days after that, October 7th, the Kesebergs decide to put the old man, Mr. Hardcoop. He is like one of the single guys. They put him out of their wagon because they needed to lighten the load. And they just told him to walk. And he would kind of fall behind during the day and catch up at night. And, after a couple days of this, he just couldn't keep up anymore. So he just kind of sat in his spot one day and he just died. Like he just sat in a little spot and he just died. So RIP to that guy. There's death number 3. Death number 4. Actually, sorry, I forgot about John Snyder. October 17th. They get to the Truckee River and by extension the Sierra Nevada mountains. Facing the giant fucking mountain with no livestock, the man Wolfinger, he decides he's going to bury his wagon in the hopes that he can come back for it later. But he just knows there's no way he's crossing that mountain right now because he doesn't have the livestock to do it. So he asks the 2 men who are traveling with him, this is Augustus Spitzer and Joseph Reinhardt, he asks those 2 guys to help him bury it. And everybody else just kind of keeps it pushing, and then they go and make camp. A couple days later, Reinhardt and Spitzer catch up to the group, and they don't have Wolfinger. It's just the 2 of them. And so they tell his wife that they were attacked by some of the local tribes and that her husband was dead and she was now a widow. It was actually a fucking lie. Those 2 guys just straight up killed him and they took his shit. I'm not even kidding you. Heinous activities out there on the plains. As the mountains loomed ahead, the group began to worry that the 2 guys that they had sent ahead for supplies, this is Charles Stanton and William McCutcheon. Actually, is his name William? Did I get that name right? As the mountains loomed ahead, the group began to worry that the 2 guys that they had sent ahead for supplies, this is Charles Stanton and William McCutcheon, that they wouldn't make it back in time to help. But somehow they made it back through the Sierras. They brought some stuff with them, and they brought 2 Miwok vaqueros, which is like cowboys, I guess you can say, named Luis and Salvador. They also brought back news. What is that news? Okay, so the news that they brought was that they had run into James Reed because after he was banished, he caught up to the Donners because they were a couple hours ahead and they didn't know that he had just killed somebody. So he catches up to the Donner brothers and he gets his homie Walter Heron, who is like his teamster. And he's like, hey, so they actually sent me ahead to California and I'm just going to go get more supplies. And so him and his homie Walter, they dip. And then on their way through the Sierra Nevadas going to California, they actually run into Stanton and McCutcheon coming back. And so then Stanton and McCutcheon, they go and tell the group, hey, we just saw James Reed. October 20th. This is the day they finally get to where modern day Reno is in the base of the Sierra Nevadas. At this time, the place is called Truckee Meadows, and they decide that they're going to rest for a couple more days before tackling the mountain. They also sent yet another group of men ahead to go get supplies. They send brothers-in-law, William Pike and William Foster. But while they're preparing to leave, Foster, he's like packing his gun and it accidentally goes off and it shoots William Pike in the back and he just dies slowly. It's like actually really tragic and sad. So 3 groups would make their way up the mountain at various speeds. Group 1, I'm just going to read it off of my list here. So sorry, I'm not going to be looking at the camera. Group 1, this is the Breens, the Kesebergs, the Eddies, and a man named Patrick Dolan. Group 2, this is the Graves / Fosdicks, the Reeds, the Murphys, Charles Stanton, and the 2 Miwok Vaqueros. And Group 3, which was really lagging behind, this is the Donners and their Teamsters. October 30th, they make camp about 5 to 6 miles away from Truckee Lake and like 9 to 10 miles from the path to California. The path leading out of the mountains was completely covered in snow, and it had been falling steadily since October 7th, which was a whole month earlier than usual. The first group would make an attempt to go through the pass on October 31st, but the snow was up to the oxen's chest in some places. In some of the warmer spots on the mountain, rain had started to come down instead of snow. And so when the weather started to turn, they kind of just turned around and decided to build their camps next to the lake. The Breens found and claimed an abandoned shanty built by a man named Moses Schallenberger in 1844/1845 when he became snowbound in the same spot. The Graves caught up around midday November 1st, and they were informed about the attempt to go over the mountains the day before, and they were told, hey, we couldn't make it through. And so they kind of just argued over whether or not, like, the rain was a sign of, like, a warming period, and, like, if there's rain, maybe it's going to warm up, and then some of the snow will melt, and then they'll be able to get to the pass. But Franklin Graves, who grew up in Vermont, he knew that, no, where there was rain, more snow was coming. The next day, the Donner family still had not caught up. Without the presence of their voted leader, which was George Donner, the Breens and the Graves decided to brave the pass and just kind of try to go through it on their own. I'm going to include a map that shows where they ended up permanently making camp and where the pass is, because I know when I was reading, it was kind of hard to visualize. They had to cross the frozen Truckee Lake, which is now Donner Lake, in order to reach the gap in the mountain that would lead them to California. So when they made the walk across the lake on November 2nd, they tried to find the pass, which was covered in snow, couldn't, and then just kind of gave up and laid in the snow for the night. Even after Charles Stanton and the Miwok Vaqueros found the path they just came through a couple weeks before, they were just too tired to try to climb through it. So they just laid in the snow and went to sleep that night. The morning of November 3rd, the party who just kind of fell asleep in the snow, they woke up to Louis Keseberg just screaming. I guess he woke up and he like kind of looked around and saw that everybody was covered in snow and was just like, holy shit, I'm all by myself. And so his response to that was to just start screaming, which, I mean, real, honestly. The snow had like kind of been falling throughout the night and just covered everybody in a fresh layer of snow. The amount of snow gave the party 2 options. Either try to go through the pass on foot and die of exposure and exhaustion, or go back to Truckee Lake and set up camp to then later die of exhaustion and also starvation. The team picked option 2 just because they wanted some time to think. They made it back to the lakeside by like 4 p.m.-ish on November 2nd after fighting the snow all day. A massive storm blew in that night. Everybody hunkered down as best they could and waited for it to end. And they waited for 8 days for the snow to end. That's going to be the theme for this next part. It's just going to keep on snowing. The Donners were lagging behind because their wagon had kind of fallen and broken an axle. And George Donner he just had to craft one basically from wood. And while he was making this new axle, he cut his hand like super deep and like it got infected basically immediately. And he would basically be dealing with this useless hand the entire time because like his hand was completely infected. And so it was his right hand too. So he cut his dominant hand and it got infected. And so he just basically couldn't use it the entire time that they're trapped. So they received word that the pass was blocked and covered in snow. They just kind of decided to build camp where they were at. And so they actually built camp at a place called Alder Creek, which was a couple miles away from where everybody else ended up camping. And they didn't even really build a camp. Like, I'm going to talk about it here in a bit, but like Franklin Graves straight up builds a cabin, and the Breens, they had a cabin that was already built and they added a roof to it. Because George was basically one-handed and Jacob was like older and he was kind of too frail, they just settled for tents covered in pine boughs, which I'll include a picture of because I had no idea what a pine bough was. And when I Googled it, I was like, oh, okay, that's a pine bough. I know what that is. So they just built that, covered it in pine boughs. And then they were like, okay, yeah, when the snow stops falling, we'll build an actual cabin. It never stopped snowing and they never built an actual cabin. The Breens had that pre-built cabin that I mentioned earlier. They just kind of added a canvas roof on top of it. Keseberg had Louis Keseberg. He also fucked up his hand, and so he could only make a lean-to out of poles and pine branches all on the side of the Breen cabin. William Eddy and William Foster built a 3-walled cabin on the side of this giant rock, which I will also include a picture of the giant rock because it's still there to this day, which is so cool. So he builds a house on the side of this giant rock, and all of the Eddys, Fosters, Pikes, and Murphys would be in there. They fit about 16 people and 450 square feet. Very small amount of space, crazy small, and way too many people. So Franklin Graves, again, my goat and the most badass of them all, he built a double cabin. Each room was like 16 feet by 16 feet, and it had its own fireplace. One side, Graves and Fosdick, and Amanda McCutcheon and her baby. And then the other side had the Reeds, their servants, and their 5 dogs, because they were all kind of like buckling down and settling in for a while. They decided to just butcher all their cattle and oxen and then store it in the snow, like as a freezer. And remember when I said that James Reed had some side quests? We're going to get to those right now. Some of my favorite parts. So James Reed manages to make it all the way to Sutter's Fort in California, and he successfully petitioned and acquired, I'm going to read this list, 30 horses, a mule, a shit ton of flour, 9 quarter of beef, 2 more Miwok vaqueros, and Amanda McCutcheon's husband, William. They made their way east in an attempt to get back to their families because they knew that they needed the supplies. But the vaqueros, the 2 like guides who were going to help them, they saw all the fucking snow and they left. They were like, fuck that, I'm not going over the snow. And they left them there. And so then after the 2 men, the 2 white men of the Donner Party decided, they were like, okay, yeah, this is actually really bad. They just stopped all attempts at a rescue. Since I'm going chronologically, that's one James Reed side quest. He's going to do some more later, but we're going to leave him where he is right now and keep on going. Back at the lake camps, Franklin Graves was stewing and cooking up an escape plan. He was somebody who thrived where others might have simply just survived. He was a frontiersman through and through. He loved being outside. He could survive in harsh conditions. He could hunt. He could build shelters. He knew how to be a strong leader. And he was not going to sit idly by while the snow froze his family and starved them out. He was going to get across the goddamn mountain or die trying. I'm going to include this little next bit, I think, because I wrote it in my script. But when I was typing the script, I was listening to like atmospheric music from Skyrim, and I read that last sentence in Jarl Balgriff's voice. Maybe I'll include it right here. I don't know yet. But the part where he's like, I'll not stand idly by while a dragon burns my hold and slaughters my people. That was my inspiration for that sentence. He was not going to sit idly by while the snow froze his family and starved them out. That was my inspiration, was Jarl Balgriff. The snow finally quit, for now, on November 12th. And Franklin wasted no time in getting a group together to attempt another crossing of the pass at the end of the lake. They got all the way across the frozen lake, and then they saw 10 feet of fresh, powdery snow. And he was like, this is a no-go. So he decided to go back and cook up another plan. But the food supplies going super quick. William Eddy, he'd been going on like daily hunting excursions. in like an effort to supplement the food that his family had already had. And so far, he hadn't been super successful at getting any like serious game. He would just bring home enough for like a meal. But this dude takes down a fucking bear by himself. He takes down a giant fucking bear by himself. And he just is so cool and so epic and awesome that he splits some of the bear meat with the Graves, the Fosters, and the Reeds. But like the downside to being super epic, awesome, and cool and sharing like his food, it didn't last very long. The conditions in the cabin were particularly awful and not much better than just like being exposed outside. It was still cold as hell, very dark, smoky, boring, and stinky. They had 0 ways to bathe and wash their clothes, so they just didn't. Like they also would just relieve themselves in the bare snow outside or in chamber pots, and I honestly don't know what would be worse. And one guy, I can't remember who it is right now, is dealing with fucking kidney stones the entire time. Not only is he starving and freezing in the snow, he's got fucking kidney stones. Out of everybody, the Donners definitely had it the worst. Except for the single men, they had it like really bad. They were basically expected to help out the families, and they only had tents and had resorted to catching, cooking, and eating mice completely whole. And when they ran out, then they started eating pieces of their buffalo hide robes that they had. So the author of The Indifferent Stars Above, Daniel James Brown, he goes into detail about like getting rough estimates for people's BMRs, which if you don't know what a BMR is, it's your basal metabolic rate, which is basically like how many calories you burn in a day just doing nothing. And it's just like going through and calculating those numbers, it just like it's such a stark picture of like just how much food they needed to eat in order to survive and how little they were surviving off of. Like having the numbers in front of you and like having the math is like, holy shit, these people were literally surviving off of nothing. Like it's crazy. I kind of want to read the last paragraph of this chapter that kind of talks about like the effects that the starvation was having on their body. So trigger warning ahead. I know that like talking about this kind of stuff is kind of sensitive for people. I mean, this whole video is a trigger warning, but like this part in particular, I know some people might be a little sensitive to, but I just want to read it. So the net result was that for some time now, they had been burning calories a good deal more rapidly than they were taking them on board with their daily rations of lean beef. All their bodies could do in response was to quietly and efficiently begin to cannibalize themselves in order to provide energy to the brain and other vital organs. Sarah and Jay and their companions discovered that they were beginning to feel weak. They began to grow gaunt. Their eyes began to sink deeper into their faces. Their fingers grew bony. Ribs and other bones began to protrude in ways they had not previously. And as all these transformations took place, they began to peer into one another's increasingly angular faces with a growing sense of alarm and incredulity. Thanksgiving Day. Another snowstorm. A week-long snowstorm. Yet again. The presence of another long snowstorm made an already desperate Franklin Graves even more desperate. He was determined to break through the mountain just so he can secure something for his family to try to go get help. And while he was sitting in his cabin just stewing for those first 2 weeks of December, he had an idea to make some snowshoes. So he put his family to work, okay? They crafted 15 pairs of snowshoes out of like just random stuff from their wagons. Like they made 15 pairs of snowshoes from the stuff that they had on their wagon. I mean, just crazy. 5-minute crafts could never. Anyway, with these 15 pairs, they decided they're going to get a group together and break through the mountain. And Frankie G went around asking who's going to be willing to risk their life for the group and for their families. This was the do or die mission. There was no turning around. The ones who were willing to go, Sarah and William Foster, Harriet Pike. This dude's name is spelled like Samuel, but it's Lemuel. I can't say it. He's a Murphy. Lemuel and William Murphy. I'm going to look up how to pronounce that. Give me a second. Lemuel. Okay. Anyway, so Sarah and William Foster, Harriet Pike, Lemuel and William Murphy, William Eddy, Patrick Dolan, Charles Berger, Salvador and Luis, Charles Stanton, Antonio, Sarah and Jay Fosdick, Franklin and Marianne Graves, and Amanda McCutcheon. If you were counting, which I don't think you were, that's 17 people, and there's only 15 pairs of snowshoes. Charles Berger and William Murphy were told that because of their size, they would probably be okay without snowshoes. Charles was kind of short and stocky, and William was just a kid. William Murphy, that is, because there's a lot of Williams in this group. December 14th, the snow finally stopped again. So they waited another couple days to kind of let the fresh powder freeze a little bit to make the surface more stable to walk on. And December 16th, they finally set out. They packed enough supplies for a 6-day, 30 to 40 mile hike to the southwest. It was actually like 66 miles as the crow flies. And the route that they end up taking is 75 miles because, again, that's another theme of the story is that everything takes way too fucking long. So the night before they left, Bayless Williams, they were a servant to the Reed family. They would pass away, honestly, and they missed out on all of the heinous stuff that happens at the cabins. The snowshoe party, which would later be called the Forlorn Hope, they left after many tearful and final goodbyes. A lot of them would never see their families again. The party got about halfway across the lake when they hit their first snag. The two without snowshoes, that's Charles and William, they could not make it any further. And without the shoes, there was just no way for them to make it over the pass if they couldn't even clear the lake. So the two of them kind of turned back around early and they headed to the camps. That left their number at 15. There's 9 men, 5 women, and 1 boy. The morning of December 17th, they set out to cross over the pass that would have been clear of snow a couple months earlier. And the physical toll it took on their bodies to walk through the snow and the trees cannot be understated. They were all suffering from various degrees of snow blindness, the temperature swings paired with the physical exertion. Their bodies could not stay comfortable at all because it's cold as hell outside, but because they're moving around so much and they're wrapped in all these layers, they're sweating and it's like putting their regulatory systems under constant stress. A normal person going through here would have trouble with all these temperature swings, but keep in mind these people have been walking all the way from Missouri and they're also starving. So yeah, they're not having a good time. Charles Stanton was bearing the worst of this group by far. He was only 5'5" and he had trouble walking in the snowshoes, and he was like really affected by the snow blindness, like worse than anybody else. Because he was one of the bachelors on this trip, he was surviving on less rations than the others because they would kind of give more to the kids, obviously. This was also his 3rd trek over the mountains, and he was reaching the end of his rope. So the night of December 18th, there was even more snow because it's always snowing. The next day, December 19th, day 4, they had only traveled 14 miles and they still had 50-ish more to go, and they only brought enough rations for 6 days. Charles Stanton was beginning to fall more and more behind. On the morning of December 20th, and when everybody was getting ready to leave camp, he just kind of made no motion to help and join the others. And Marianne Graves, this is Franklin's daughter, she went to him and asked if he was coming. And he was like, yeah, I'll be on my way. He packed his pipe full of tobacco, puffed away, made no effort to get up, and his bones would be found near the same spot that she left him in 5 months later. The Forlorn Hope had descended into 6 Mile Valley. They had hiked 8 miles on December 19th and were looking at another night under the stars. Their supplied beef had almost completely run out. Their shoes were basically rotting off of their feet and exposing their skin to the elements, and their feet were getting frostbitten. The men on the trek were doing much worse at this whole survival thing compared to the women. Franklin Graves was growing weaker and weaker, and Sarah was finding herself at the back of the group with Jay more and more as the walk continued. Back at the camps, Margaret Reed and Elizabeth Graves were doing all they could to keep their children alive. They were boiling the small amount of beef that they had left along with strips of oxenhide to form like this sort of nutritious glue. But it did not taste great, I'll tell you that. It had no flavor, there's no salt, there's no nothing. It's literally just glue. And they had it the best. In the Donner tent, Jacob literally just put his head in his hands and didn't move until he just died like that. The tents of the single men saw their numbers pretty much completely decimated. James Smith, Sam Shoemaker, Joseph Reinhardt, they were already dead. On his deathbed, Joseph Reinhardt, he confessed to Doris Wolfinger that he was the one who actually killed her husband. Remember earlier when I said that those two guys helped that man Wolfinger like bury his wagon? Yeah, they killed him, and then held that secret in, and then on his deathbed, he confessed to his wife. Like, fucking terrible. December 21st, this is day 6. It's snowing all day long. Visibility was 20 to 30 feet, and the Forlorn Hope, they had no idea where they were. They had been going mostly west. That whole morning, they were kind of following the path of the sun. And towards the afternoon, with tensions running high, a lot of them were arguing to go back and be with their families. But Sarah Foster and Marianne Graves, they were like, no, we have to keep going. There is no turning back. And the Miwok guides, the 2 vaqueros who were with them, they just kept on going west because they wanted to go home. And the girls just turned around and followed them, and then the group just kept on going. But as is the theme with the story, they make another devastating mistake. When they reached the edge of 6 Mile Valley, they faced a low ridge to their right, to the northeast, or a deceptively easy path down to their left, which would have been south. If they would have gone up the ridge to the right, they would have seen Emigrants Gap and the established road that was like a quick and easy path down to Bear Valley. But they didn't want to go over the ridge because they would have had to climb it. And so they went to the left and they skirted the ridge entirely and instead faced a steep and painful decline down into the canyon of the North Fork of the American River, which still has some areas to this day that you can't even access by helicopter. There's some areas of this place that you can only get to by rafting in the river. Like, it's terrible, terrible conditions for walking. Oh, and it also snowed all night. December 22nd, this is day 7 for the Forlorn Hope. They attempted to set out once more, but they found that a warm southwest wind had melted the snow enough to clump onto their snowshoes and make walking incredibly difficult. So they went back to their camp and just tried to start another fire, but it wouldn't stay lit on the ground because it was all wet and mushy. The next day after getting started, they realized that they had no idea where they were. The guides also had no idea where they were. They were also out of food. So Patrick Dolan, one of the single men, decided to say the quiet part out loud and suggested that they all draw sticks on who would give their body up so that others might live. Even at the protest of William Foster, the men drew slips of paper, and ironically, Patrick Dolan drew the short stick. Fortunately for him, though, the other men could not bring themselves to commit murder, so they just kicked the can down the line and decided that when somebody died of starvation or cold, that they would just eat them then. Christmas Eve. This is day 9 for the Forlorn Hope. Rain, 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 sleet, rain, sleet, rain. The weather was really, really bad, as is the theme. The men, particularly Franklin Graves, had really struggled in the cold and wet conditions. Patrick Dolan, perhaps psychologically damaged from like drawing the short straw, was ranting incoherently. Like, he had just completely had a psychotic break. And the boy on this trip, Lemuel Murphy, was doing the same because he was just a kid at the end of the day. So they made no moves to leave camp. They came to the realization that some of them would never make it to California, and they questioned if any of them would. Harriet Pike, one of the women on this journey, she managed to find a dry piece of cotton in her jacket, and they finally got a fire going. And when they went to go chop more wood, the hatchet flew off of the handle and disappeared into the snow. I cannot make this up. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Antonio, the Mexican drover, crawled closer to the fire because he was trying to get warm, and the rest of the crew noticed that his hand had fallen into the fire, and he made no attempt to move it. Someone tried to pull it out for him, thinking that maybe he had just kind of passed out. But then it fell in a second time, and then nobody cared enough to move it again, and that's when they knew that he was gone. He had passed. With the wind continuing to pick up, Franklin Graves grew weaker and weaker, and he begged for his daughters to sit by his side when they came to him, somehow weeping. I don't even know how they had the tears in their body to cry at this point. He begged his daughters to take his body and use it as food so that they might live and see California and get help for the rest of their family. He died around 11 p.m. that night with his 2 daughters right beside him. Out of all the deaths in this story, I think that this one kind of hits the hardest. I mean, I know that I was like joking earlier that like Franklin Graves is my goat and that he's my favorite, but I think it's just because he is someone who, for all intents and purposes, should have survived. He was like built for these conditions. He was somebody who survived these cold winters. He knew how to make shelter and hunt game, and I feel like he just should have been somebody who lived. And I think also just, he kind of parallels my own dad, like, because my own dad, for better or worse, is like one of the strongest people I know, and his personality is larger than life. And just putting myself in Sarah's shoes, like, I can't imagine sitting next to my own dad and like hearing him beg me to use his body as food. Like, it's just a terrible and horrific scenario. Like, and I don't know, like, studying stuff like this and just like the indomitable human spirit, like I said earlier, it's like the fact that these girls, I mean, spoiler alert, Sarah and Marianne both survived this. The fact that they were able to literally look death in the face, look their father in the face as he's passing, and like are able to make it through is just, it's admirable. Like, the strength that these two girls display after going through all of this is just so admirable. And that's why I love talking about stories like this. And like, I don't know, thinking about the guilt that Franklin must have felt too, like, because it was his idea to go and he just got his family in this mess. And I mean, like, it's not his fault, but like, I can't even imagine the death and like, or the guilt. I mean, I can't imagine the guilt. And I mean, he really deserved to live a longer life and have a more dignified death. I mean, all the victims of this tragedy did, but we still got more to go. And our girl, Sarah, she has more losses to experience, unfortunately. After it was confirmed that Franklin didn't make it through the night, William Eddy instructed the living to lay in a circle as close to each other as possible with their feet pointed inwards. I'm gonna try to explain this tent thing because I was trying to find a picture of it on Google, but basically, from what I understand, is they all kind of sit in the middle with their feet like facing each other. They sit as close to each other as possible, put their feet in the middle, and then have another person sit in the middle on all the feet. And then they kind of serve as like a tent pole, and they have like blankets all over them to kind of like preserve their body heat. I hope that that makes sense. I can't find a picture of this. They're sitting in this little circle, Christmas morning, day 10, and there was no Christmas cheer to be had. And they had one more soul to add to the death toll. Patrick Dolan, the guy who suggested that they kind of start eating each other, he escaped the little tent through the night. He had been ranting, raving, having his psychotic episode, his mental episode. And before he passed, he did this thing called paradoxal undressing, which, if you're familiar with any sort of survival scenarios that include extreme cold, that's a phenomenon that happens sometimes where people who are suffering from the effects of hypothermia will take off all of their clothes and just lay in the snow. And that's like a sign that they're on their way out. So he took off all his clothes, he ran around in the snow, and then he made his way back to where everybody was sitting in their little makeshift tent, and he just passed away. And they laid him next to Franklin and Antonio. Back at the lake camps, there wasn't much in the way of Christmas cheer either. Patrick Breen was still incapacitated. He's the guy with the kidney stones. So he has the kidney stones and he's starving. And Augustus Spitzer, he was one of the single guys. He was on the brink of passing away in their cabin. The Murphys were out of beef and low on hides. They had taken to boiling oxen bones over and over again in an attempt to make like a weak bone broth. And they boiled those bones until they could be chewed. And then they did that. But on Christmas Day, there was at least some oxtail to add to their weak broth to make it a little festive. Yay, Merry Christmas. The Donners and Wolfingers were on a similar diet, with all their men either dead or incapacitated. George Donner, somehow still alive, clung to life even with an infected arm, which is crazy. He lives like way longer than I thought. Elizabeth Graves and her kids were doing great compared to everyone else. She still had some frozen beef. She was expecting her husband to be back any day now, and she had saved some dried beans and tripe for a Christmas meal. And Margaret Reed did similarly. She had saved some stuff for Christmas Day. And it's not like officially confirmed that her and Elizabeth Graves like worked together to give their kids like a little extra special Christmas, but I mean, they had very similar meals planned, and Margaret even had a little bacon. Look here, she had a little bit of bacon. The storm that had claimed the lives of 3 of the Forlorn Hope finally ended the day after Christmas. After saving all their energy for the task of finding their stuff, the group began digging around in the snow when all of a sudden a little mouse had jumped out from the snow, and 13-year-old Lamuel Murphy caught it, put it in his mouth, and swallowed it whole and alive. I don't even have words for that. After not eating for 36 hours, the worst of the hunger pangs, they kind of dissipate. Your body stops sending those signals, and their livers began to break down fatty acids into ketones in order to produce enough energy to power their brains and other vital organs. But this was acidifying their blood by producing a shit ton of acetone, and so it made their breath smell like nail polish. Keep in mind, they have no idea what nail polish is. Insane. Insane. Because Lamuel ate that mouse, his hunger pangs came back full force, and he began to scream throughout the night, "Give me my bone!" And he would bite people, like, "Give me my bone!" You know, like, Jesus. He also was trying to run out of the tent just like Patrick Nolan, and after hours of trying to keep him in the tent, he passed away in his older sister's arms, which, I mean, I have a little brother who I love more than anything in the world, and I don't even want to think about that. The next day, the butchering officially began. December 27th, day 12. The Forlorn Hope split up into three groups so that no one had to see or eat any of their family members. But once the butchering process started, it was noticeably similar to the butchering of any other animal. Once the head, feet, and hands were removed, and essentially the humanity, they had to start with the organs because those would spoil quickly. The smell of any meat cooking stimulates the appetite, so they got past that first meal pretty quick, but not without utter emotional strife and pain. I mean, I can't even imagine like having to make that decision. Especially, like, I know that a lot of them, like, kept some sort of faith as well. Actually, the 2 vaqueros, the 2 Miwoks, Luis and Salvador, refused to partake in that meal at all because of their spiritual beliefs. The first few bites swallowed, their energy levels rose, the headaches and fatigue lifted, and their bodies asked for more. So they cooked more and they ate more. And I said earlier how Luis and Salvador didn't partake in the meal due to their spiritual beliefs. Um, they were looking at these people sideways, and they were plotting to make their exit ASAP. There's no like confirmed record of this, but like they do split from the group later on, and I'm assuming that it's after this point that they're like, we got to get the hell away from these people. The author, Daniel James Brown, postulates that although they could have survived without the cannibalism, they mistakenly believed that they were dying due to starvation rather than the cold. Um, when Patrick Dolan asked the cannibalism question, that like gave him the psychological sledgehammer, so to speak, to like break through that barrier that exists in our brains that says don't eat people. Essentially, because he broached the subject, it put that thought into all their heads and just like validated what they all had already might have been thinking. And they also had the added burden of being their family's final hope at survival. After the grizzly butchering and meal was over, they made plans to push on. They spent the next 3 days drying the flesh to make it portable. December 29th, January 1st, days 14 through 17. On the morning of December 29th, our forlorn hope finally left what would later be called the Camp of Death. They were making steady progress before being faced with steep declines and inclines going in and out, canyons and valleys. On the peak of one of these ridges, they could actually look out and see Sacramento Valley, but they saw that there were still hella mountains to go, and they were not close to where they needed to be. The women had a much bigger will to live than the men, and it seemed that they would have to drag the men kicking, screaming, moaning, pissing, shitting, crying, throwing up, along with their journey. They made it to the point where they no longer needed snowshoes. But on the evening of January 2nd, the human rations ran low, and so they resorted to eating their shoes and snowshoe strings. January 3rd saw them descend low enough to stay largely snow-free, but the tree branches were starting to like rip on their clothes, like they would get caught and snagged and then rip their clothes almost clean off. January 4th was the beginning of the end for Jay Fosdick. While he was slowly declining, the group discussed secretly the possibility of killing Luis and Salvador to kind of replenish their supplies. I don't know if these two were like warned about the conversations happening or if they just like caught the vibe, but they dipped out of there overnight. Like Luis and Salvador, I don't know if they just like overheard these people talking about killing them, but they got the hell out of there. They were gone. The next day, Marianne Graves and William Eddy decided to try their luck at hunting some game now that they were kind of below the snow line. And they found evidence of a deer and they began to track it and they find a deer. Eddie, who was still kind of suffering with like the side effects of starving and hypothermia, he can't get a steady aim, so he's all shaky. And so he takes the first shot and it goes wide. And upon seeing this, Marianne Graves yells out, basically like, "Oh my fucking god, you missed!" Like, she doesn't say that exactly, but essentially she's like, "I can't believe you missed." And he technically didn't miss. He just kind of like he just didn't get the kill shot. So like he hit the deer, but like it didn't die immediately. So the deer like takes off and running, and eventually it kind of staggers and passes out, and they catch up to it, and the two of them they slit its throat to drain it of the blood, and they drank the blood directly from the wound. Like it's and although they had managed to kill a deer, the others lagged behind enough that they kind of got lost amongst the trees, and a lot of the group didn't even manage to find Eddie and Marianne throughout that entire day. So they just kind of spent it alone with all this deer meat. And Jay especially could no longer muster up enough energy to move, and Sarah was not just going to leave him behind. So he died overnight next to his bride, and in the book, Daniel James Brown says that she just kind of laid down next to him and hoped that she would die with him. And again, like as a married person who is absolutely obsessed and in love with her husband, I've been with him since I was 15 and I'm 28 now. So I just can't imagine. I literally cannot imagine. This whole scenario is just, I can't imagine. I can't even put myself in her shoes like that. It's cool. But the horrors persist. And so does Sarah Graves Fosdick. The next morning, she stumbles into camp by herself, and the Fosters waste no time asking if they can use Jay's body for food. And she just kind of replies numbly, "You cannot hurt him now," and left it at that. And although they literally had a whole deer to eat, I guess because Jay was fresher than the deer, they just couldn't pass it up. Someone roasted his fucking heart on a stick over the fire, which, like, Jesus fucking Christ, his wife is right next to you. Like, that one little side story just, like, completely gutted me, and it was just sick. Like, I mean, it's one thing that, like, you have to consume human flesh. Like, I understand that you had to do this to survive, but, like, that's just a whole other level of sick and twisted. Like you couldn't you didn't have to do that, you know? Moving on. January 7th through the 8th, days 23 to 24, there were 7 out of 15 people left in the Forlorn Hope, all 5 women and 2 men. They continued through rocky canyons and ridges. They descended around 2,700 to 1,200 feet in elevation. Their clothes are almost completely rotten away at this point. They were continuously wet from the snow and the rain. And I mean, honestly, none of them cared that their clothes were ripping. Like, I mean, I'm pretty sure people had whole ass hanging out. Like, they just did not care because, I mean, why could you? They were also basically barefoot because their shoes were gone. And then if they even had shoes, they would have cooked them and ate them. So they had no shoes. And it might seem like they're getting close to being saved. And no, actually, they still have more days to go. The same day, back at Truckee Lake, Margaret and Virginia Reed had staggered back home along with Milt Elliott. They were 5 days into an attempt to go over the mountains themselves, and they just didn't make it, and they turned around. The Murphy cabin was also a really sad state. The matriarch, Lavina, she was in bed, completely unable to move. Her 17-year-old son, John, he was doing most of the heavy lifting and, like, taking care of his younger siblings and making sure they were doing okay, but the infants slowly were beginning to wither. The Forlorn Hope began to experience true madness and degradation of their moral compasses and normal human empathy and compassion. Because when humans are subjected to this kind of level of extreme survival, those emotions are like the first thing to go. Like, you look out for yourself and your family, and that's basically it. And so when they stumbled across Luis and Salvador, they stumbled across them still alive, although like just barely. William Foster shot and killed them and then butchered their bodies for food. Like, they were just at that point. A few more days they wandered until finally they came across a human footprint in the mud, and they followed the tracks until they came upon Maidu village, and they were finally saved. They scared the shit out of these poor people, though. I mean, like, the author mentioned that the kids of this tribe, when they saw these people stumbling out of the forest, they literally started screaming and crying and ran away, and they must have looked like absolutely fucking crazy coming out of the woods like that. But while they were glad to be amongst people, they knew that their families were suffering and starving back at the lake. So they asked the Maidu to take them to the closest American settlement. And they had to ask, I mean, I'm talking basic hand signs and like very basic words like, please get me to please get me to people who can help, essentially. So by January 17th, just a few short miles from Johnson's ranch, Sarah and the rest of the women, they just gave out. Like they just sat down on the trail and rested and were not able to move. They were so close. That afternoon, a Maidu man carrying a very emaciated William Eddy came to the doors of Johnson's ranch, and he told them that the rest of his party, they were unable to move. They were 3 or 4 miles, back up the trail. So people at the ranch sent out a rescue team to come pick him up, and they reached Sarah around midnight that night. The news that Sarah and the rest of the Forlorn Hope brought was very harrowing. Some of the families at Johnson's ranch were ones that the Graves had actually initially traveled with. The Tuckers and Richies were originally headed to Oregon, and then when they got to where the path splits to go to either Oregon or California, they had basically been influenced into heading to California, which, I mean, I get it, girl. All that to say, the Tuckers and Richies knew Sarah and her family and were willing to help rescue them. William Eddy also wrote a letter once again to the man, the myth, the legend, John Sutter, asking for supplies. How many times did they ask him for stuff? I mean, I think they asked him for. Hold on, wait. I went back in my script and I looked. Let me see. I literally typed this. I'm gonna read it verbatim what I wrote. How many times did they ask this man for shit? This is what, like 2 or 3 times, right? Hold on, I gotta look. BRB. Okay, it's the 3rd time. The first time they sent Charles Stanton and McCutcheon, and then James Reed went and asked, and then now William Eddy is asking. They are selling their souls to an evil capitalist. I am telling you. They are going to owe him so much money after this. It's crazy. So while everyone's gathering a rescue team together, the survivors focused on healing. Sarah, now 22, was a widow. She no longer had her father to fall back on either. So she could only hope that her mom and her siblings would make it through the mountains. And her mom had a whole cache of money from the sale of their homestead in Illinois that was like still safely tucked away. Back at the lake, the remaining survivors were embroiled in a Cold War of sorts. Boo. Food was scarce, and every matriarch was looking out for their own kids. Margaret Reed, who had been living in the double cabin next to the Graves, they moved to the Breen's cabin because their little Cold War had gotten that bad. In a moment of desperation, Elizabeth Graves seized like a bunch of hides and other goods that Margaret had left behind and was holding them for ransom, and was basically like, my husband sold you cattle that you owe us for, so I'm gonna hold on to all your shit until you pay us back for it. They sent some of the Breen boys to go like negotiate with her and like try to get some of Margaret's stuff back, and they only came back with 2 hides because Elizabeth Graves was not playing any games. The Murphy cabin, however, they saw another death, and this time Livina's son John, the one who was like kind of keeping everybody alive. He is number 14, and his is significant because all of the deaths at this point were all still men. At the end of all this, the stats would show that the men died at nearly 2 times the rate of the women, and there's like not really a concrete reason as to why. Like we can point to a couple of different things. Like, I mean, I think the author brings up in the book that like the women had quote unquote more to live for, I guess, because they had all of their kids, but like a lot of those men were fathers, they had kids to live for also, but yeah, I don't know. The men died at 2 times the rate of the women. The women they had that dog in them, I guess. I don't know. February 4th, a rescue party from Johnson's Ranch, later called the First Relief. There's going to be 4 of these reliefs, so I'll talk about all 4 of them. They departed with 14 men, including a still weak and emaciated William Eddy, because he was trying to get back and see his family. So about 5 days into the journey back up the mountain, Eddy, he can't go any further because he still needs to rest. And basically, he needs to get his strength up. But I mean, unfortunately, his beloved wife, and I do mean beloved, the author talks about in this book that like he was a wife guy for sure. Like William Eddy loved his wife, and his wife and daughter would not make it. It's really sad. I mean, pretty much everybody lost somebody in this whole story. The rate at which people were dying in these camps is really starting to ramp up at this time. As of February 1st, the death toll at the camps included Margaret and Eleanor Eddy, Harriet McCutcheon, Augustus Spitzer, and Milt Elliott. February 18th, the first relief arrives to a completely snow-covered landscape with no signs of life. Sorry, I needed to pull out my book again because I have to read this quote because there's just some quotes that you just need to hear directly. So give me a second. So Daniel Rhodes, this is one of the men on the first relief. He described what happened when they got there. We raised a loud halloo, and then we saw a woman emerge from a hole in the snow. As we approached her, several others made their appearance in like manner of coming out of the snow. They were gaunt with famine, and I never can forget the horrible, ghastly sight they presented. The first woman spoke in a hollow voice, very much agitated, and said, "Are you men from California, or do you come from heaven?" The woman that said that line is Lavina Murphy. The double cabin was buried under a dozen feet of snow. When Elizabeth asked her rescuers about her husband, they kind of lied and said that his feet were too swollen to make the journey back over the mountain. But Elizabeth knew her husband, and she knew that even if his feet were swollen, even if his feet were broken, if he was able to get back over those mountains and get to her, he would have been there. So she just had that sneaking suspicion that he didn't make it. And Mary Ann Graves, her second daughter, she had actually written letters to be delivered to her mom and siblings, kind of detailing the shit that they went through. It was kind of part of her healing process. She was just getting all of these thoughts and traumas and memories out on paper. And then she also wanted to tell her mom everything that happened, because who doesn't want to tell her mom, right? But anyway, the First Relief didn't deliver those letters because they didn't want it to destroy morale. So, I mean, even though Mary Ann Graves technically told her mom through letters everything that happened, she never got to read them. So yeah, I honestly don't know where those letters are now. I hope somebody saved them. The Donner Camp was another devastating sight. The First Relief couldn't carry any of the small children, so the mothers were kind of forced to make really difficult choices. I'm going to go through them because all the moms had to make these choices. But 4 of the elder Donner children would end up leaving the camp with the First Relief Party. And Elizabeth Graves, she sent 3 of her 7. Peggy Breen and Lavina Murphy, they sent their older children as well, with the exception of Naomi Pike. She was an infant, a baby, and her mom was waiting for her at Johnson's Ranch. So I think one of the men just carried the baby through the mountains. Philippine Keseberg had already lost 1 child, and she was not about to die next to her allegedly abusive husband. So she took her remaining kid and she left that man behind, period. Margaret Reed felt the same way, and instead of sending just her older kids, she decided to take all 5 of hers plus herself and get the hell out of there. And she had a whole ass toddler with her too, so big ups to her. John Denton and the remaining single men decided that they would go as well. February 22nd, the First Relief leaves the lake. They hadn't made it across the frozen lake before. 2 of Margaret Reed's children had to be brought back to their cabins. They couldn't walk for very long on their own, and there really wasn't anybody available to carry them, so they went back and stayed at the cabins. The next day, the First Relief finds that the food cache that they had left behind at the pass was completely ripped apart by animals. Tucker kind of puts everybody on short rations and just kind of tells everybody, keep pushing. On the 24th, John Denton can go no further, and the group kind of sets him up with his own little fire and just kind of leaves him there. His remains are found at that spot at a later date. The same day had some pretty decent weather, at least for avoiding hypothermia, but the melting snow made walking really difficult, and 3-year-old Ada Keseberg could go no further, and she passed away that night. February 26th, they are once again down to eating their shoestrings. 2 men from the First Relief scout ahead for the Second Relief, which they figured was on their way up the mountain, and you guys are not going to believe who's leading the Second Relief. It's motherfucking James Reed, baby. He is back, and he is fresh off a couple battles in the Mexican-American War, because he straight up joined the military after he attempted that rescue. Remember a couple months ago when he tried to go back through the mountains to go get his family and then couldn't because the snow was just that bad? Yeah, so he just decided to go join a war and get some land. After the quote-unquote Battle of Santa Clara, and again, I say that with a huge fucking eye roll, Reed went to the city of San Francisco to petition the Navy for help. He left San Francisco with $1,000 and a group of men to go lead the Second Relief and go get his family. Now, the men that he got from this, they would end up leading a Third Relief later on, but he was just too impatient. So he went, and then the other group of guys that he got from San Francisco, they would lead the Third Relief. With all the craziness happening, though, the people left behind the camps were starting to look at the bodies of the deceased and they were mulling over the choice to use them as food. I have another passage to read. Give me a second. This is from Patrick Breen's diary. He says, Mrs. Murphy said here yesterday that she thought she would commence on Milt and eat him. I don't think that she has done so yet. It is distressing. The Donners told the California folks that they would commence to eat the dead people 4 days ago. I suppose they have done so ere this time. There's like 3 separate instances of this cannibalism stuff happening, and that was instance number 2. There's a third one still coming. In happier news, which is a rarity in the story, James Reed caught wind that his family was traveling on the first relief, and so he like stayed up the whole night, like making them little treats and little snacks. And like the next morning, he like reunites with his wife and all of his kids, and he hasn't seen them since October 5th. And we're in February. It's been months. He's been through a whole war, and his kids made it. Like, I don't know. That's like the one good news, I guess. But he can't stay with them for long. He's got to press on and go get his other 2 kids that were left behind at the cabins. So 48 hours later, he's there. His daughter saw him, the one that was left behind in the cabins, and like ran out to meet him and was like so excited to see him that like she tripped and fell in the snow, and he like picked her up, and it's just so sweet. He like picked her up and then went back into the Breen cabin to get his son. But then he gets to the cabin and it's not good. Where the first relief saw bodies, the second relief saw bones. Lavina Murphy brought James Reed into the bowels of the cabin where the children were, and there were clumps of hair and blood everywhere. Reed told them that they had 2 days to kind of straighten up, get their strength up, and then leave, basically. Elizabeth Graves and all of her children were still alive, though they were severely emaciated by hunger. They were like completely out of food at this point. March 2nd, yeah, we're in March now. March 2nd, Reed and McCutcheon push on to the Donner camp because remember they're staying at Alder Creek, which is like 5 to 7 miles ish away from everybody else. Somehow George Donner is still alive, and this is the guy who had a serious infection. He cut his hand, and like right when this whole like camping thing started, and he's had an infection this entire time. He's still alive. I have no idea how this guy is still alive, but like Elizabeth Donner like could barely move and take care of her kids. Like that's I don't understand. That's seriously a mystery. Anyway, Tamsin, George's wife, was very starved, but still able to get around. The 3 kids were looking suspiciously healthy, and the men of the relief suspected that it's because the adults had been feeding kids like human flesh, basically. Ugh. Gotta do what you gotta do, I guess. The second relief, again, asked the survivors to make the choices about who would go and who would stay. Elizabeth Donner couldn't walk, so she sent 3 of her children, but she couldn't bear to part with the youngest 2, so she just kind of kept them. Tamsin could still get around, but she wasn't going to leave George to die in the mountains by himself. So she and her daughters would wait for the third relief, and in the hopes that George would either pass before then or like somehow miraculously get strong enough to leave. Now, I'm sure you're all so tired of hearing about how tough it is for our friends here at the lake. It is seriously very messed up, all the stuff that's happened so far. But unfortunately, the horror is actually going to get much, much worse. Like worse than you can imagine. So let us press on. We are almost done, I swear. March 3rd, James Reed, he went to Louis Keseberg's lean-to shack to kind of look for him. And although the last time that they had saw each other, Keseberg was literally calling for Reed to be hanged because he had murdered John Snyder. James Reed still took the time to like give Keseberg a fresh set of clothes, clean him up, and leave him with flour and half a pound of beef jerky, and told him, hey, like more help's on the way. Like, I don't know. I know that James Reed, like a lot of people, he's like kind of an asshole in this story, but like that's like a really noble thing of him to do. Like he cleaned him up, left him clothes, left him food, and then said, hey, don't worry, more people are on the way. I think that's kind of cool. After that, the second relief set off towards the pass, 3 adults and 14 children in tow. They slowly made their way to the base of the summit, only 2 miles from where they started. Elizabeth Graves, after being forced to ask the other men for help, her husband Franklin had like a whole cache of coins from their sale of land in Illinois, and he like buried it with the wagon. And she obviously couldn't dig that up herself, and she had sent her sons earlier, and so she had to ask some of the other men to help her dig up that money, and she did not want to do that because she did not want to let these men know that she was hoarding a bunch of money. Like that was her money for her and her kids, you know? Anyway, she was nervous about this because she ends up walking away from camp that night and like burying the coins again herself, like in the hopes that she would come back for them, you know? Um, and then again, it begins to snow because of course it does. March 5th, the storm was intense. The fire that they had set up had melted a hole in the snow that was 10 feet across and 10 feet deep. 5-year-old Isaac Donner passed away overnight. It was just too much, you know, and he's 5. And it kept on snowing. Elizabeth Graves, the stalwart woman married to Franklin, had reached the end of her rope. She got her children this far, and she just was finally worn down completely. And she passed away the night of the 6th, and the secret of her husband's cache of coins would remain a secret. The morning of March 7th, James Reed announced that he was going to take his children, McCutcheon, and any able-bodied men to find the third relief and, by extension, more supplies. The Graves and Donner children could not make the journey, and neither could the Breen family. After Reed and the others left camp, 14-year-old John Breen, he managed to like carve some snow steps down into the giant snow pit that the fire had made, and then everybody just kind of made their way down to where the fire was. Once everybody made their way down, they were blocked from the wind, but like every time they needed to go get more firewood, they had to climb the snow steps to get them out. And keep in mind, 10 feet deep, okay? 10 feet down. There was a lot of snow with no food for many days. The cannibalism question pops up again. And just to make a long story short, I mean, they start consuming their companions. This hole of horrors would be called Starved Camp. The day that Reed left those poor souls in the snow, the first relief arrived at Johnson's Ranch with some of the first survivors from the lake camp. The members of the second relief had left 2 men in charge of like caring for the survivors at the lake camps. And those 2 men, I'm going to name drop them, my name directly, Charles Stone and Charles Caddy, quickly said to each other, "Hey, we're going to get the fuck out of Dodge quick." And they left. They straight up left. Hims and Donner, horrified that these 2 men who were supposed to like, you know, feed all of them, take care of them, horrified that they were just going to be abandoned there, begged these 2 guys to just take her last 3 daughters, and she was offering them like a lot of money to do so. They agreed to take them, and so they like took the girls and then hiked back to the Murphy cabin and then left the girls at the cabin. Again, like I said, the Donner camp is like a couple miles away from everybody else. So like once these men were basically out of eyesight of Tams and Donner, they just left her 3 daughters at this random cabin. And Lavina Murphy, she's like the leader of the Murphy cabin, right? She's already passed. And her son and her grandson have also already passed. And so the only adult there really is Peaceburg. And to make matters even worse, these 2 guys, they like get to the pass. They see the hole that everybody else is in, the starved camp hole. They look down and they're like, "Oof," and they keep walking. Like these dudes they just leave. They just see all this suffering and they just leave. Like it's so crazy to me. They just left. They joined this mission to rescue people, and then they just abandoned them. Like why even join, bruh? So then these 2 assholes, eventually they catch up to James Reed, and he himself had caught up to the third relief. And it was initially being led by a named Salim Woodworth. I think he was like part of the group of men that James Reed had requested from San Francisco. So while Salim and William Eddy and William Foster, those are the 2 guys who survived the Forlorn Hope, they were all there. They couldn't wait for somebody else to rescue their own family, so they just decided they were going to tag along and they were going to go get their family themselves. They were not waiting around for anybody. But when those survivors from the first relief like started to pass the men in the third relief and they saw just how bad the conditions were, Woodworth and his men did not want to go over that pass. They did not want to go rescue these people. And so, I mean, James Reed, William Eddy, and William Foster, they were begging him to help, like literally begging him and his men to help because like they were the only ones who were like really fresh to go. And so then eventually Woodworth bargained with some of his men saying like, "Hey, I'll pay you $3 a day and $50 per child that you save." And I mean, they got a group together. Okay, so I did the math. I mean, I did the math when I was writing this. I'm going to talk about it now. Um, that's $125 a day and a $2,000 bonus for each kid that they save. That's in today's money, which, I mean, I don't even know if that's worth it to go through that snow, quite honestly. I mean, that's something to sneeze at. That's a good sum of money, but like, go through all that snow? I don't know about all that. Guess who decides to go on this relief mission? Charles fucking Stone, one of the assholes who abandoned the 3 Donner girls back at the camps. I think personally he's motivated by the money that they're now offering. The author's like, oh, maybe he felt guilty and he's like going to go back and save them because he felt guilty. No, I think he's motivated by money, ultimately. I think a lot of men at this time were. With the 3rd relief team assembled, they were ready to press on. Unfortunately for our 2 men of the Forlorn Hope, James Eddy, that's William's son, he had already passed. And a night or 2 before that, Keseberg had brought George Foster like into his bed overnight, and that boy did not make it till the morning. The women and the girls watched in horror as Keseberg took that boy's body and hung him on a peg like a piece of meat. I warned y'all about this guy, and he gets worse. Like, this dude gets worse. Back at Starved Camp, the snow hole in the ground, it had gotten 15 feet wide and 24 feet deep, all the way down to the bare ground. That's how far this snow hole had become. And as time passed, Patrick Breen, he just kind of gave up and he could barely care for himself. And his wife, Peggy, she was the only adult left to help care for all the kids that got left behind in that hole. And so she was like making them tea and like giving them a couple seeds, as long as she could. And then eventually that all ran out. And then Mary Donner, one of the girls, suggested that they eat the dead. And the 3rd instance of cannibalism on this journey happens. 2 days later, the 3rd relief stumbled across Starved Camp. The first thing that they saw actually was Elizabeth Graves' almost skeletized body on the outer rim of the giant snow hole. Unsure of what to do, they just kind of left one man with the Breens. 4 of them went to the lake camps. 3 of them took some of the Starved Camp kids down the mountain. And then there was that one guy who just kind of stuck around with the Breens. Eddy, Foster, and 2 other men with them arrived at the lake camps that day, and they ran to the cabin that they thought held their boys, who they hadn't seen since December 16th, because that's when the Forlorn Hope left. But they opened the door only to find the 3 Donner girls, Lavina Murphy and her son, and Keseberg. When the men asked about their sons, Keseberg was brutally honest with them, and he told them that they had died and been eaten. Eddy was ready to kill him right then and there in that cabin. But after seeing just like how emaciated and starved he was, he promised him that if he ever saw him in California, he would kill him. And actually, he almost made good on that promise, because a couple years after that, he ran into him and he was ready to kill him. But James Reed stopped him, luckily. Otherwise, he probably would have done time, to be honest. The men, afraid of being held up by yet another storm, left 4 souls on the mountain: George and Tamsin Donner, Lavina Murphy, and Keseberg. Within days, the rest of the survivors trickled into Johnson's ranch, carrying devastation and trauma. I'll wrap up briefly by talking about the 4th relief. It was mainly billed as a rescue mission, but it was mainly a rescue of goods rather than people. A lot of the children were left orphaned by this event, and as a result were penniless, and they had no way of earning any sort of money to live. And so the men who went back to the lake with the 4th relief were allowed to take a pretty good cut of whatever they could find, just as long as at least half of it went to the survivors. And when they got there, they saw a completely deserted scene. They found no one alive, but all the belongings had been ransacked. And they were a little bit confused by that. And so they saw some footprints in the snow, and they were like, okay, that's suspicious. And so they followed these footprints. Lo and behold, Louise Keseberg is somehow alive and surrounded by human brains and also some human liver. The men asked where the Donner's money and goods were, and he swore he had no idea where any of that stuff was, and he had no clue what they were talking about. But they could smell that this man was lying. And so they shook him down, and they were like, we know that you know where all this shit is at, so you're going to tell us where this shit is at. And so eventually he's like, okay, okay, all right. They pick his pockets. They find like $225 in gold coins. They find silks and fabrics, jewels, and they find some of George Donner's guns and stuff like that. And so they try to find out what the hell happened, and he gives them this crazy ass story. So he tells these men of the Fourth Relief that Tamsin Donner came to him after George had finally died from his infected hand and arm, and she was gonna make an attempt to go through the mountains by herself to go get to her kids. And in the effort of trying to do that, she falls into this frozen river or whatever, freezes to death, dies, and on her deathbed tells Keseberg where to find their stuff and to please, oh please, bring my stuff down the mountain for my children. Right. So they didn't believe this guy's bullshit for 2 seconds, and then they threatened to literally lynch him if he didn't tell them where the stuff was at. And so basically, after realizing that it was either die or give up the location of the rest of the stuff, he begs them to spare his life, and he tells them where they can find another $275 worth in silver. A couple days later, the Fourth Relief came back to Johnson's ranch with some money and Keseberg in tow. And with that, the saga's over. Out of 87 people who were a part of George Donner's party, 47 would die, most of those being men. The survivors would go on to lead mostly full lives, and many of the children would grow up and get married and have kids of their own. Sarah would get married 2 more times, actually. Her second husband was kind of a piece of shit, but her third one, I think, was all right. I could literally go on and on about what they did afterwards and how all of their lives turned out, but that would just add way too much time, and I've already been recording for 2.5 hours at this point, and I want to leave as much incentive as possible to read the actual book. I can always make a follow-up video, I guess, maybe like a little short one, to talk about it if there's enough interest, and we can kind of talk about where they all ended up and their ties and stuff like that. But once again, I really want to recommend the book that inspired this video, The Indifferent Stars Above by Daniel James Brown. There's so much that I had to condense and cut out for the sake of time, but this book is so well written and researched, it was impossible for me to put down. I think I read it in like a week. That's pretty much it. I'm gonna go to the outro and all my thank yous now. Huge thank you to my friends and family who I am literally making this video for so I can subject them to my special interest. My husband especially helped me out the most as someone I can bounce my ideas off of and read parts of my 27-page single-spaced script to. Okay, I'm gonna get out of here. This is cringe and awkward, and it's like I'm not getting a freaking award for this, so I'm just gonna wrap this up. Thank you for watching if you did and if you made it this far. Adios. Hope to see you in the next one because I want to make more of these. I'm thinking about making one on the Queen Mary because I really love ocean liners. And again, I love California history and things like that. So she's stationed in Long Beach. So I'm thinking about making one on her, thinking about making one on the mission system and Hearst Castle. So let me know. And if you have any other ideas that you would like for me to cover, let me know. And I'll think about it. Thanks. Bye.